Hi, I'm Davy. I'm awesome. And welcome to Davy's Awesome Stories, where I tell funny stories from my past or go on a rant in an effort to make you laugh. And this week, I'm doing another story about my old, weird, crazy roommate. To catch those of you who may be first time watching up, when I was 19, I moved out of my parents' house for the first time, rented a room out of a guy's house. A guy who was weird, quirky, clingy, and did this every time he talked. Now, among the things that this guy was, one of them was he was very clingy as a friend. He definitely didn't have a lot of friends. He was very lonely. Now, before some of you are like, "Oh, that poor guy," there was a reason for that. Not only was the guy very clingy to his friends, he was manipulative. He used people. It was basically like he only wanted friends for what he could get out of them. And that's not a good way to keep friends. So like most of you, upon first hearing that, when I realized he didn't have a lot of friends, I felt the same way. Like, oh, I feel bad for you. Before I even moved out, I didn't feel bad for him at all. He kind of did it to himself. Not only was he weird, creepy, clingy to his friends, but to people his friends knew. Like when I lived with a guy, this was very early 2000s. Not everybody had cell phones. I didn't. We all had landlines. You had to call our house and hope we were there. And it got to the point that most people who would call me didn't like calling me. Why? Because my roommate was always there. The only time he would really leave was to go to casinos. Otherwise, he was there all day, every day. He didn't work. He lived off disability, Social Security, and mine and my roommate's rent. And he had a bunch of phones in the house. He was always near one. So even if we were home, the one answering the phone was more than likely him. My family and most of my friends got to a point where they only called me if they really needed to talk to me. Not for little things. Like my brother, nowadays, well now it's normally texting, but he'll text me because, oh, I thought of something funny. I wanted to share this with you. Before, when we didn't have texting, he'd call me for stuff like that. Like, hey, thought of something or saw something really funny, thought you'd like it. Soon after living with this guy, he didn't do that anymore. As soon as I moved out, it resumed. The roommate that I had with this guy, we both got to a point we were fed up with him. We moved out, got a place just the two of us, and he didn't mind calling if he answered the phone. Which, number one, that roommate didn't answer the phone unless he really was the only one there. He hated phones. But if one of my family members or somebody called for me and I wasn't there, he basically acted like most people would act. There would be pleasantries, like my brother saying, "Hey Paul, it's Josh. How you doing? Davy there?" Paul would respond, "Oh, hey Josh. No, he's not here right now. Do you want me to have him call you when he gets back?" "Yeah, if you would." "Sure, no problem." "Alright, thanks Paul." "Okay, you're welcome. Have a good one." Again, like normal people. Quick, to the point, pleasant. See you later. Never stayed on the line with my brother to try to get to know each other, get closer with my brother. The guy I rented from Denny, not the same thing. No, if my brother would call, which like I said, at one point did not become unnecessary calls. Like he wouldn't call me to tell me like, hey, this new movie's coming out, we should go see it. Hey, here's a funny thing I heard. Nothing like that. He would tell me that stuff if he had to call for something important. If he was calling like, hey, when you come up this weekend, could you bring... Because again, almost every time he called, my roommate was the one that answered. If you called that place 9 times out of 10, it was going to be him that answered. Very rarely was it going to be me who got to the phone first. Or just got to the phone because he wasn't there. And most of the time when they called, I wasn't there. I was 19, 20. I was a little bit older than 21 when I finally moved out. So I lived there for not quite 2 years, but close. But around that time, I'm young. I didn't stay home very much. I went to work, and then usually after work, I went to hang out with a friend of some sort. Which was another frustrating thing about this guy. I talked about it in another video. I almost never got my messages. It was very common that my brother or my mom would call me and ask me why I didn't call them back 3 days ago. And I'd have to explain to them, I never got your message. But my roommate would always keep him on the line. And as mean as my brother seems like he can be, he's not the type who can just be like, you know what, dude, I don't want to talk to you. Bye. He's more polite than that. I will get like that at some point. My brother, you'd have to really, really make him mad. Which means you'd have to do something really personal. He's not going to do that just because. So he'd be sitting there on the phone with him like, uh-huh. Oh, your scanner's working. That's great. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, wow, it's 411 now. Who would have guessed? Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm sorry you didn't like Spider-Man. And even worse, he'd just say creepy things. Like, I remember one time, my brother called, my roommate answered, I was home, so my roommate came up to me and, of course, told me, your brother's on the phone, he wants to talk to you. So I answer, and I'm like, oh, hey, Josh, what's up? Well, first of all, what are you telling your roommate about me? What? Almost every time I call, he answers. And he always says, your brother talks about you so much, I feel like we're brothers. That's kind of creepy. So what are you telling him? Thinking about it, only thing I've really told him is I have a brother and his name is Josh. Because the thing is, as well as I knew this guy, lived with him for almost 2 years, I really didn't share a whole lot about my personal life with the guy because I never really got close with him. And I'm a pretty private person. So yeah, I told him about my family. If something specific was going on, I would tell him what was going on. Like, at one point, my brother was frantically trying to get a hold of me because my mother was in the hospital clinging to life. She lived for another 15 years. But apparently even on that day, he called my roommate answered, and even though he told my roommate, is Davy there, my mom's in the hospital, this is how much my roommate cared about anybody but himself. No, he's not. Sorry about your mom. Oh, I wanted to tell you, I got this new pot that has like a built-in strainer. I'm not making that up. At the time, this was a new invention. They had a pot where you could close the lid and strain your noodles and stuff with the pot. I have one myself. It's convenient. But my brother called, said, is Davy there? My mom is in the hospital. And he wanted to talk about his personal crap. That was one of the few times my brother had no issue being rude at all. Just straight up was like, I told you my mom's in the hospital. I don't have time for this. Called me at work. Told me. And I did leave work to go be with my mom. Because the doctors at the time were telling us might want to say goodbye. Again, she lived. She was okay. She lived for more than a decade after that. But this was the start of her downfall. Even after the point when he would only call me for things that were important, he'd still have to deal with this guy and couldn't stand it. Like I told you the worst spaghetti story. When I told my brother, it was a new story. It wasn't like years later we were sitting around talking about funny things. It was a brand new story. He called and he was like, hey, before I get to what I needed to call you about, I gotta know, what's so bad about this guy's spaghetti? He's really upset about it. Now, I'm not going to go into that story. You can go watch the video yourself if you want to find out. But after I told him what was wrong with his spaghetti, my brother was like, that's just sick. My brother hated talking to this guy, but it wasn't just my brother. Occasionally, my brother, who was living with my parents at the time, would be told, like, hey, call Davy about something, and he would refuse. And apparently, I found this out later, sometimes my mother and him would argue back and forth over who's going to call me. Because neither of them wanted to call me, because neither of them wanted to deal with this guy. Because even my mother would get irritated talking to this guy. Which, here's the thing, if you knew my mother, you'd find that very funny, because my mother was very opposite of me and my brother and my dad. In that, my mother was very, very nice. My mother could not say mean things to people's faces unless they really pissed her off. And again, it had to be like really big deal, piss her off. Most of the time meaning you did something against her sons. But otherwise, she was so nice to everybody. Even when she didn't really like them. And for her to be like, no, I don't want to talk to this guy. No, I'm not calling, you call. Don't make me talk to this guy. Said she really didn't like him. And for good reason. It's just he always wants to go on and on about nothing, and I just want to ask you a quick question. Not gonna lie, that quick question usually meant, can I borrow money? Not only would he say that kind of creepy thing to my brother of, I feel like we're brothers, but a couple of times to my mother he even said, he tells me so much about you, I feel like I'm one of your children. Now that one could have been true. I talked about my mom a lot. I was a mama's boy. I don't mind admitting it. But to say that he feels like he's one of her children... He was 3 years older than her. Again, even my other roommate, Paul, never said something like that to her. He liked my mom. They'd spoken a couple times. She was very nice. So, in between telling her I'm not here, he might do the little pleasant, so how are you doing kind of thing. And especially after she ended up in the hospital, he'd usually ask something like, how you feeling? And she'd say, I'm doing okay. But that would be the end of the conversation, like a normal person. It got to the point where usually the one calling me became my dad. Because as much as I hate to admit when I have things in common with my dad, this is one thing I have in common with my dad. My dad, he's not going to be rude to you just to be rude to you, but if you give him the slightest reason, he has no problem doing it. So legit, the first time he called me, he called, my roommate answered, and it was the first and last time my roommate tried to keep him on the line, talking to him when he just wanted to talk to me real quick. Because my dad, he didn't like calling anybody. But he'd heard the stories from my mom, he heard the stories from my brother. Apparently they were arguing back and forth over which one was going to call me, so he finally said, I'll do it. And their conversation went like this. Hey, is Davy there? I need to talk to him. I'm his father. Oh, his dad. Nice to meet you. You know, he says so much about you, I kind of feel like I'm one of your kids. Well, listen, you're not one of my kids, and I don't have time for this. I didn't want to call you so I can get to know you like you do to my wife and my other son. I just wanted to talk to Davy. In fact, in the future, if I call, I don't really want to have any conversation with you. So when I call and I ask to talk to Davy, can you just put him on the line? Oh, well, he's not here. Okay then, give him the message that I called. And I want you to actually give him the message that I called. You understand me? Now, as the governor of California would tell you, this conversation is now terminated. He remembered to give me that message. So there you have it. That's my story video this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post some videos, and leave a comment. If you ever had a roommate that tried to glom onto your family, let's hear about it. Love you guys.